Get underway. So, welcome everyone who's come along today for this Rural Speed Management webinar. So this is the first webinar from the Rural Road Safety Network, the new network set up for ACRS. So I'm your facilitator today. I'm based in Christchurch in New Zealand, one of the directors with Via Strada. And firstly, I want to start with some acknowledgements. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the many First Nations of Australia who continue to be the sovereign custodians of their countries and the sovereignty of the Māori in New Zealand. We acknowledge the ongoing traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and learn, and pay our respects to elders who have passed on the legacy of knowledge and culture to the future generations. May the sharing of knowledge through Mātauranga Māori and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being and doing guide you with wisdom and courage as it enhances our collective futures. So firstly, just a little bit about the Rural Road Safety Network. For those who haven't come across it yet, so there is a link on the ACRS website. You can go and find out about it. We basically kicked off with a workshop at the conference just recently in Perth. And that really was built on the fact that we recently developed a policy position statement on rural and remote safety and thought, well, we really should have a group to go with it as well. So we've set up a small committee. There's currently 8 of us. We've had a couple of meetings now, first one in November. But I guess if anyone else is keen on joining the committee, we're certainly welcome for anyone else who might want to express an interest. Feel free to contact me. And I guess also any ACRS member can become a member of the network as well. You just go to your personal site there on ACRS and you can tick the box to say I want to be a member of the network as well. So we're hoping to have a series of webinars for, well, quite some time really. And so this is the first one. This is a bit of a test case for us to see how it goes and hopefully quite a lot more to come over the coming year. So a little bit of housekeeping. This is going to go for about an hour. It will be recorded and you should be able to see a link on that in a few weeks' time as well. We're going to have a series of presentations up front first and then have some Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions, please hold them to the end of the presentations. Probably most useful is to think who it is you want to ask the questions of. You should hopefully be seeing a Q&A button down the bottom of your screen, and that's the best place to put in any questions, and then we can have a look at the end and see which ones we want to do. There is a chat box as well. If you want to put anything in there, you can as well, but I'd encourage you actually using the Q&A, as that's the best place for us to ask any questions at the end. So we've got 4 speakers today. We're going to start off with Brett Williams, who's going to give us a little bit of a rundown of some recent submission work that we did on default open road speed limits. Then we've got Michael Brown from Auckland Transport. He's going to talk about some work they've done in Auckland on lower speed limits there. Mathew McQuinn from Mornington Peninsula is going to talk about similar work they've done over there. And finally, we're going to finish with David Nicholson from Western Australia and the work that they've been trialling in Augusta Margaret River as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Brett Williams. And hopefully with the magic, he can share his screen and we can get this going. There we go.
I should take it over there. You can see the slide, yes? Very good. Okay, yep. Thanks everyone. So yes, my name's Brett and I'm joining you from Ghana Land here in Adelaide, where I work in local government. I'm also involved in the college's local government network and the South Australian chapter, and was one of the members involved in preparing the college's submission on open road default speed limits. Just before I continue, I would like to acknowledge anyone in the audience or listening in who have had a lived experience of road trauma, either directly or through someone you know and love. This particular topic I'm talking about effectively considers people's lives in economic parameters, so it might appear flippant or insensitive, but that's not the intention. All right, let's get this moving. So, as Glenn alluded to, the policy position statement on rural and remote road safety, sorry, I'm going to move that off the screen. Was basically showing that speed was a major consideration as part of that. And so the 3 points on the screen are taken from the policy position statement about rural roads having higher posted speed limits and a corresponding higher vehicle speeds and crash severity, often the disparity between the posted speed limit and infrastructure, with high vehicle speeds on lower quality roads, especially unsealed ones. And the fact that people become habituated to risk due to repeated travelling at high speeds with little or no experience of trauma from crashes. So for those still coming to terms with the role of speed and road safety, especially anyone who might be a bit more sceptical, I encourage you to read this policy position statement along with some other documents that I'll be referring to in this presentation, and I'll try and drop some links into the chat when I get a chance. So those who are involved in this space will know that there is some strong support from parts of the community to set appropriate speed limits and match the roadside environment. However, there's always going to be that element of people that often have that existing expectation of perceived acceptable travel speeds. And this is, often provokes those strong negative responses from some members of the community. And on this discussion about default open road speed limits, the example on the screen here is from a state highway in South Australia on a fairly low volume section of road, about 1,600 vehicles a day departing a small settlement. And I suppose because those travel lanes are about 3.3 metres wide and there are no shoulders, the powers that be probably thought that putting a 100 kilometre per hour sign there might not be the best thing. So instead they've used this N60 sign, which is effectively the starting of that default rural speed limit. And, this is, I suppose, the current situation we're in where those jurisdictions do use default speed limits rather than signposting every road. And it's this approach that we really need to try and consign to history, like other things shown on the screen there, which were basically once considered to be completely normal and are now almost reprehensible in that context of understanding. And that's, I suppose, the challenge we're working on. So onto the consultation regulatory impact assessment. This initiative was overseen by the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, Sport and the Arts. And I'll just refer to them as a department if I mention that anymore. And this process, the consultation opened on the 29th of September this year and closed on the 10th of November, so about 6 weeks. The original closing date was the 27th of October. However, this was extended by 2 weeks. And for more background, this initiative did come from the National Road Safety Action Plan 23 to 25. And that is on the screen there, an extract from that saying that the Australian government will coordinate a review the Australian road rules on reducing the open road default speed limit. And that was supposed to commence in 2023. The fact that the consultation didn't come out until September this year, towards the end of the current term of that Road Safety Action Plan, is rather disappointing. And the college expressed that in a separate submission on the midterm review of the current Road Safety Action Plan 2020 to 2030 or whatever it is. And this actually has origins back from the 2018 parliamentary inquiry into the prior National Road Safety Strategy from 2011 to 2020, which highlighted the implementation failure to adequately address road safety in the previous decade. So the college's submission was one of more than 11,000 submissions received as reported in the media. So this garnered lots of interest. But on our submission, it was prepared by a number of ACRS members. I won't name you all, but thanks to everyone who was involved with that, and stewarded really well by Ingrid, our CEO. And we actually met in Perth at the college on the Thursday morning. At the time, the deadline was about 4 days away, and we were wondering how we were going to scramble this together. So it was a good, fruitful discussion, and we're lucky we had a couple of extra weeks to work on it a bit better. And in our submission, first, we did welcome the initiative and acknowledge the elements of the regulatory impact assessment, the RIA, which correctly identified the fundamental issues at play here, which was the challenge of Australia's vast road network and low population density with our rural roads, and also that speed is the single biggest factor in crash outcomes and the role of kinetic energy in that discussion. However, there were a number of shortcomings that we identified in our submission. Firstly, about the scope and consistency. The fact that the RIA looked at default or unsigned speed limits could potentially lead to a situation where roads that did have signposted speeds, often 100 kilometres per hour, they may be perceived to be safer than roads with a reduced default speed if the default speed was reduced as well. So it just really only looked at one segment of the speed limit in rural road sort of paradigm. We also expressed concern that the cost-benefit analysis had some pretty major biases that both overstated the costs of making the change and understating the benefits of lowering speed limits, and also just the general moral argument that is cost-benefit analysis really appropriate to consider public safety policy in this sort of discussion. So moving back to that point about the costs and benefits, one thing here is that the analysis used that $5.7 million, which I guess could be credible. It's an economic parameter from a federal government department, the Office of Impact Analysis. However, when you're looking at those the benefits of avoided fatalities in this sort of CBA analysis, you can see there that the dollar cost for someone's life can be so variable depending on where you get it from and its background and all of that. And we can see that costs are up to $11 million in Australian equivalent dollars in New Zealand at the moment. And really, when you're talking about this sort of decision making by numbers and analysis, when that sort of major parameter can be so variable, how much confidence can you actually have in the analysis? And that's why we thought the $5.7 million and other parameters were probably grossly underestimating the actual benefits of avoided fatalities and serious injuries. Then on the other side is that travel time savings and costs. So Glenn actually shared around, as part of our discussions, a certain presentation where it posed this sort of argument: does 60 seconds saving for 100 people equal the same as 1 second saving for 6,000 people? And this is, I suppose, the challenge of those really small travel time savings. And when you start aggregating these huge data sets, can you really trust the output? And that's where we felt that in this process, that the actual costs of reducing speed limits can be grossly overestimated as well. And that's probably part of the background of these socio-psychological factors being a major barrier. And this wasn't in our submission, but it'll make more sense further on why I'm adding it to this slide. So there's things like cognitive dissonance, motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, and optimism bias being such a big challenge to try and manage in this process. However, despite the shortcomings of the CBA, all scenarios actually produced a positive economic outcome. And this means that even if it was probably not correct, that we think the economic outcome could be much greater, it still showed that there was a positive effect of any of the adopted speed limit changes. Therefore, really, this is a moral argument. We've ticked the economic box. So what's the true reason for needing to do this? Now, our submission also touched upon Vision Zero and the laws of physics. And so obviously all Australian governments are committed to Vision Zero, meaning zero deaths and serious injuries by 2050. And that the fact that 100 kilometres per hour on undivided rural roads is going to create crash forces that vastly exceed human physical limits. And not only is that considering that 70 kilometre per hour head-on threshold that we sort of should be familiar with the safe system approach, but there's even more research that RAF shared with us that's soon to be published that's saying that 10% threshold is probably more like 60.5 kilometres per hour. And this is why speed is so vital in terms of Vision Zero. So onto the speed limit we advocated for. We chose 70 in our submission. Now, that wasn't based on hard and fast, yes, that's going to solve all the problems or whatnot. It was a bit strategic, and that was given that we factored there's going to be some very strong resentment about any changes to the default. We felt if we didn't go far enough the other way, the middle ground might not be where we might need it. So that was a strategic decision to put that in our submission. We did note, however, that any default speed limit was not going to be blanket everywhere forever. Rather, there should be some national framework where road authorities could set higher speed limits so long as they could demonstrate something like a minimum 3-star OSRAP safety rating. And it just goes to the comment that roads with high speeds must have high quality infrastructure. So, we talk about blanket speed limits, and, nobody wants that blanket reduced speed limit that aren't default speed limits, blanket ones anyway, but I digress. We also touched upon the co-benefits. This is just more ammunition for wanting to achieve this sort of wide-scale change, emissions, cost of living, less wildlife impact, less need for expensive infrastructure upgrades, improved productivity, fewer lost time injuries in the workplace, all those sorts of things. And I'm just going to show a quote from our submission that really honed upon the need for that change leadership. And I guess it was a real premonition for what ended up happening. And I'll read the quote out. So, simply applied as proposed, with no consideration of the safety and function of the infrastructure or community education and awareness, the RIA may raise unfounded concern. A change leadership approach is required, which addresses speed limit setting across the road network. So what happens? Well, the results of the consultation RIA came in, and less than 2 weeks after consultation closed, so less than 11,000 plus submissions were received, the Infrastructure and Transport Ministers met, and they noted that the Commonwealth does not set speed limits in any jurisdiction, and that states and territories are responsible for these decisions, and that no further work is being undertaken on open road default speed limits. So very disappointing, but also unsurprising, given the approach that was taken. Where to from here? So our submission, which I do encourage anyone who's interested in this to read, it proved that the current default of 100 kilometres per hour is indefensible based on evidence, economics and ethics. So while implementation failure continues in the political process, for the rest of us, the professional obligation remains, and we must continue to push for reduced speed limits supported by an effective change management approach. And in that context, and going back to that slide where I talked about motivated reasoning and cognitive dissonance, Austroads are actually embarking on a new project that's currently out for tender for any consultants who might be interested in this space. And that's looking at supporting speed management change through improved community insights. So we know the why. The real challenge at the moment is the how, and we can't rely on the political process because it is complete failure, as we've just experienced. So how else are we going to do this? And the conversation will continue. My last slide is more just if anyone who is still coming to grips with this discussion and the situation, I strongly recommend you to become familiar with a lot of the Austroads guidance on this. These 3 documents in particular, if you're going to start anywhere, Austroads Guide to Road Safety Part 3, it has just been updated, and it is an absolute goldmine for the reasons as to why speed is so intrinsic as part of the discussion in terms of eliminating road trauma. And I'll put some things in the chat there, but I'm happy to hand over to the next speaker if you want to jump in, Glenn.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Yes, it was certainly an interesting process, that one there. I see already there's at least one question in the Q&A. So just a reminder, if you've got any questions for Brett, feel free to pop them in and we can address them later on. But for now, we're now going to jump over to Michael Brown to talk about what's been happening in Auckland.
Kia ora everyone, hope you can hear me and see me. Michael Brown, I'm the Head of Road Safety Engineering and Education, Auckland Transport. And today I've been asked to come along and talk about the Auckland Transport Safe Speeds programme, which has been delivered over the last few years. Apologies, some of the slides may have been repeated from previous presentations. However, we have this time went for more of a rural focus, and we've tried to change the numbers just to accommodate the kind of the rural audience. What I would say is it was put together relatively quickly, and I would always recommend to go to the source information that we have on the website. We have all the reports up in there with all the calculations and how we got to the figures that we've got to. So I would always recommend to go there. Going back in time, back to 2017, Auckland was facing a bit of a crisis on its roads, and we engaged Eric Howard to come over and do a business improvement report. So Eric was tasked with basically seeing how road safety was delivered in Auckland and understanding what was working well and what wasn't working well. So working with our key partners in New Zealand Police, the Accident Compensation Commission, NZTA and Auckland Council, and just seeing how we could improve things. Through that business improvement review, it was noted that we had levels of trauma that hadn't been seen in Auckland for over 20 years. and with DSI increasing far than exceeded population or any vehicle growth. With the publish of the Business Improvement Review, it gave us the permission or the mandate to look at how we could make a step change for road safety in Auckland, and it ended up with the creation of a 10-year road safety programme business case. And this programme business case looked at all types of options as to what we could do and how we could make things better. And it suggested an increased level of investment to try and make that step change. So, for example, we were traditionally working with around $20 million a year, and this was suggesting we would be upwards of $60 to $80 million a year of investment. And speed management was seen as a key part of this and was a major focus for the team. It's just a graph showing how we were heading and how we were tracking in 2017. So you can see that something needed to change and something needed to change quickly. And we'll have a look back at this graph at the end of the presentation. So as we created the Safe Speeds programme, we understood that we had to look at all parts of the network. So the rural areas, city centres, some town centres and residential areas, and our urban roads, our mixed-use urban arterials, where a lot of our harm was occurring. But for this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the rural parts of it and try and make sure that it makes sense, as I say, from a rural point of view, and I won't get into the urban network too much. So obviously, Auckland's quite a big network, and we had to kind of prioritise where we were going to do the work. So we split the rural areas into pockets or segments of the network, and then we worked out what or where we would get the biggest return for our investment. So understanding what the predicted DSI savings would be and focusing on those ones first so that we got the biggest return as quickly as possible. So just to give some context to it, so phase one was delivered mostly in 2020 with some in 2021, and that was approximately 900 kilometres of the network, or 11%. And then over 2022 and 2023, there was an additional 27% of the network covered. So we have approximately 2,900 kilometres, sorry, we did have 2,900 kilometres of the network covered, and that included 110 30-kilometre-per-hour zones that we installed. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always everyone happy with it, but we managed to plug on because we had some really supportive CEOs and a really strong board of directors who wanted to make a change, and that's very, very important. As part of the permission to deliver so much so quickly, we had to commit to doing regular evaluations of the programme. And there was a 12-month evaluation, but that was never published because it was so quick. But there was an 18, a 24, and a 36-month evaluation undertaken. And it's the 36-month evaluation that I'll be talking to today. There were other evaluations undertaken looking at public sentiment and active mood shift. But this presentation is mainly focused on the ABLE report that looked at the 36-month performance. We have put the evaluations on hold at the moment because, as many of you will be aware, New Zealand's going through a bit of a shift in its approach to speed management, and with the with the speed limit reversals that were undertaken and the disestablishment of Auckland Transport coming within the next year, we're unsure where or who's going to have the road controlling authority to make speed limit changes. So once we have a better understanding of that, we will hopefully, if we're still around, continue with the evaluation of the programmes. So some of the evaluation considerations that we had to take in were, a lot of it were COVID-19 lockdowns for our initial delivery. So understanding that the network wouldn't be performing as it would normally perform and taking that into consideration. And we also took into consideration regression to the mean. But we felt because of the size and scale of the programme that wouldn't be as maybe important to think about if it was maybe small individual segments that were sporadically spread across the network. So we considered it, but it wasn't seen as being a significant issue. The report that I'm talking to today was mainly focused on crashes, so where the injury crashes were occurring, severity before and after, and then understanding what the impact on the average speed on the different corridors as well. So we captured that through TomTom data and some tube counts just to correlate with the TomTom data. So as mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about the Safe Speeds Phase 1, Phase 2 interim evaluation from 2023. And what we got from the Phase 1 results, so this was period ending December 2023 and the 5 years prior to implementation, that we've seen a 56% reduction in rural fatal crashes, a 26% reduction in deaths and serious injuries, and a 24% reduction in rural minor injury crashes. With the Phase 1 and Phase 2, there was a drop. So it was a 38% reduction in fatal crashes, a 12% reduction in rural deaths and serious injuries, and a 12% reduction in rural minor injury crashes. It should be noted that the Phase 2 was delivered in 22 and 23, and the data that we used was from the end of 2023. So some of them, it was less than 6 months of data. So we committed to doing it consistently and using the data that we had, but we are a bit skeptical of the results for the Phase 2 information. And when we look at the average speeds or the drops in average speeds, for the Phase 1, we've got a 7% decrease, and it's coming down as a predicted DSI is 22%. And if you look at, which is within the realms of what we were seeing, if you look at the Phase 1 and 2, again, we were getting a 7% reduction in the average speeds on the corridors, which predicted we should get a 22% decrease, but we're not there. So we're hoping that through time and further evaluation, we'll be able to see that the app has improved on those networks. But remembering that the first phase of what we installed or delivered was at those highest risk corridors, so it should be giving us our best results there. But we'll just have to wait and see once we get the full results through. So this is where we're tracking now. So you can see from 2017, we were making some good progress. And then in 2022, there was a high number of rural DSIs. But what we were able to see through the evaluation is on the corridors that we've made the changes, they were still showing a reduction. So we need to understand what's happening on the rural network. And if we've got time later on or another presentation, AT have developed a monitoring tool, which is monitoring every single project we've delivered since 2017 and to see how it's working and the effectiveness of it. And one of the things we found is that the rural crashes or the rural interventions work really well at the start, but then they're tending to tail off, and we don't know whether that's ongoing maintenance or whatever, but we need to look into that. But the actual speed limit reductions on the rural corridors were still being effective. So for key learnings, I'll run through this relatively quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time today, but it's about having a clear evidence-based plan and tying all your comms around that and going out as early and as often as possible so people have a chance to warm up to what you're wanting to try and deliver. We were very lucky, as I mentioned earlier, to have a really engaged CEO and a board who wanted to make a difference. So making sure that your leaders or your decision makers are understanding of what you're trying to do and how you want to do it and what the benefits will be. One of the things that really worked was one of our general managers took the AT board out in a minibus and showed them the type of roads that we want to make changes on and getting them to guess, is this a 60 or is this an 80? And they were starting to kind of assess themselves what the road should be, and it was making sense to them. So if people can see it making sense, then it helps them to get things over the line. For me, one of the big benefits from my point in the delivery side of things was developing a team of people who had the ability to make decisions there and then. So getting the right people in the room and having people who were at a level within the business who could make calls on budget, on timings, on the messaging. And that was really, really good for us making that initial, getting that initial momentum going. One of the big takeaways and from our early stuff, we probably didn't have this, but it was listening to our communities and focusing on working with the willing. There are a lot of, as it was mentioned earlier, there are people who want speed limit changes. There are communities that want change. And if we focus on them and we show them that the sky doesn't fall, then it means we'll get more evidence to go forward and try and achieve more. One of the big things is if we try and push something which nobody's going to accept, it just gets everyone's back up and you can lose the greater benefits. So it's about trying to kind of make sure, work with the willing and show people that it does work. The program's been very lucky. It's received some international recognition. So in December 2024, we got the Prince Michael International Road Safety Award, and it was endorsed by an international panel of judges highlighting Auckland Transport's significant contribution to aligning safe system limits or safe speed limits with best international practice and safe system principles. And that's a picture of the awesome team just in the bottom corner there. Also, the AT Safe Speeds programme was also recognised as high commended in 2020 at the ACRS Diamond Road Safety Award. And one of the things that was mentioned was that we had over 12,000 submissions, which is a huge amount of interest. And I think it was one of the largest public consultations or public responses that have been in Auckland. So we really managed to engage with the community, and not everyone was happy with what we were doing, but at least we got the conversation going and we were able to get feedback. Residential speed management, which was a subset of the programme, won an award for the Transportation Group New Zealand, and the Town Centre programme, which was another subset, was recognised at the IPWA Awards last year. And one of the big highlights for me last year was the AT Road Safety programme was awarded the New Zealand National Road Safety Excellence Award in 2024, and it was acknowledged to play a key in reducing deaths and serious injuries across Auckland, and the speed programme was recognised as being key in its success. And it's just any excuse for me to wear my kilt. And then I've got questions, but yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. And yeah, I've been very impressed with the work that you guys have been doing up there, both urban and rural there. So again, reminder, if you've got any questions for Michael, put them in the Q&A. I see Brett's been doing a very good job of answering some of the questions already. And now we're going to hand over to Mathew McQuinn, jump across the Tasman to find out what they've been doing in Mornington Peninsula.
Thanks, Glenn. Well, did the share screen work? It looks like it didn't work.
Looking good.
Good. All right. Looks like it's not working on this end. I'm Matt McQuinn from Mornington Peninsula Shire in Victoria. Similar to the speakers so far, despite strong evidence that widespread implementation of appropriate speed limits to improve road safety has significant benefits, it's always been a big challenge, particularly for the local government. Our Safer Speeds on Rural Roads project has demonstrated a successful systemic batch approach to speed management on our high-risk roads through implementation of appropriate speed limits. The Mornington Peninsula is about an hour southeast of Melbourne. We have a mix of busy urban townships and residential areas, tourist attractions and rural environments, but we also have unacceptably high levels of road trauma. We're generally among the worst of Victoria's 79 municipalities, with 107 deaths and over 2,300 serious injuries in the past 15 years. So we have a big challenge in reducing road trauma. For many years, we've tried to be proactive and innovative in road safety. In 2016, we became Victoria's first towards zero municipality and adopted the goal of zero road deaths and serious injuries, which was an important landmark for us in this project and others. As we know, speed's one of the four pillars of the safe system, so it's important, one of the important focus areas on our road safety journey, and a part of that is obviously speed limits. And as we've been talking about, the higher the speed, the greater the probability of a crash, and the higher the severity of crashes that occur. It's essentially a matter of kinetic energy, which increases disproportionately with vehicle speed, reaction time, braking distances, and of course, human tolerance. Appropriate speed limits, that is matching the speed limit to the road environment, isn't the be-all, end-all in road safety, but it's one of the key basics to get right, as we've been talking about. Death and serious injury can and do occur at legal speeds, but especially when the speed limit's not appropriate for the road. Within the Mornington Peninsula, we've traditionally had 100km/h speed limits on rural roads, with many having significant crash history and high crash risk, including narrow lanes, large trees close to the road, like in this photo, where a simple mistake could easily result in death. A visual example of, I guess, appropriate speed limits and where we were coming from is that current road safety knowledge tells us that roads like the one on the left are suitable for higher speeds, but many rural roads like the one on the right are not. As we sort of mentioned, or other speakers have mentioned, head-on collision at 100 kilometres per hour, based on current evidence, is almost certainly fatal. 80 kilometres per hour, it drops about 30 to 40%. Sort of what most people state is 10% at around 70, but as Brett mentioned, potentially it's looking more like 60 with sort of updated evidence at the moment. But certainly makes a big difference at those higher speeds of around 100 kilometres per hour. Significantly upgrading these roads isn't feasible, but even small reduction in average speeds can have significant reductions in road safety risk. For example, reducing the average speed by, say, 10 kilometres per hour can potentially reduce injuries and deaths by an estimated 35% and 40% respectively. So for over 2 decades, essentially, we've been striving to have a consistent 80 kilometre per hour speed limit on our high-speed Shire managed rural roads, but had resistance locally and from state government. During this 20-year time, there was 32 fatalities and 280 serious injuries on the roads that we're talking about today. In 2019 alone, there were 6 deaths on the 33 roads that have 90 or 100 kilometre per hour speed limit. So we need to take action. The traditional approach of reducing speed limit on one road at a time is slow and creates inconsistent expectations, experiences for drivers, and takes a lot longer to see the benefits of road trauma reductions. So our innovative approach was to apply 80 kilometres per hour to all our remaining high-speed rural roads that had 90 or 100 kilometre per hour speed limits, which was essentially instigated by, sometimes it takes a spark of some sort, by our mayor at the time, Councillor David Gill, going to the Age newspaper, which is one of the big newspapers in Melbourne, which led to a pretty quickly a meeting with the Department of Transport and an agreed 2-year trial of 80 kilometre per hour speed limits on the 33 roads. And essentially the objectives of the trial were to match the speed limit with the road environment, to reduce the crash likelihood and make the road more forgiving so that crashes are less likely to result in serious injuries or death when crashes occur. This is a map of the Mornington Peninsula with the roads in red and yellow. This is what some of the roads look like, or a sample. There's a mix of sealed shoulders, unsealed shoulders, edge lines, no edge lines, trees close to the road and a bit more space, but essentially none matching that upper level of barriers to a freeway or highway standard. The project, particularly when it kicked off, got a fair bit of media attention, quite a lot of positive comments as well, which helped support the project. Community engagement and consultation is something that people are often interested in learning about the project. In summary, we urgently implemented that 80 kilometre per hour speed limit before Christmas in 2019. So there was no time for extensive community engagement. It basically became an information exercise to inform the community about the trial. Essentially what we found, there was significant support, no major uproar, and that the speed limits were implemented quite smoothly. And in the 5, nearly 6 years since, we've had very few inquiries or requests about sort of increasing the speed limit back up. So although we might not have chosen to do the community engagement in this way, in retrospect, it was probably the best approach to have good sound reasoning, inform people, it being a trial that will be evaluated, people could accept that and then move on. I can see where it could be tempting to do a lot of community engagement for such projects and trying to get the community on board, but there's also, I guess, advantages in taking a different approach, like with a trial. With it being a trial, there was a comprehensive evaluation undertaken, coordinated by Road Safety Victoria, which looked at community sentiment, road trauma and vehicle speeds. Summary of the outcomes is that the 80 kilometre per hour speed limits had high level of community support, lower vehicle speeds were achieved, and lower road trauma. So in terms of community sentiment, which again is something that people are interested in and is not probably studied as much as the engineering, speed and road trauma aspects, is that we did a randomised sample of 1,000 people through Wallace Market and Social Research to get an understanding of community sentiment 12 months after the speed limits have been implemented. So people had a chance to experience them, not have an initial negative potential reaction prior to the change. And the headline stat is that 59% supported and 22% didn't, with the remaining being neutral. So sort of almost 3 times as many people supported the change as didn't. So went a long way to debunking the perception that matching appropriate speed limits to the road environment would be viewed negatively by the community. There was lots of other insights from the survey, but overall there was recognition and support for that the trial has improved safety. People generally supported the trial, or the speed limits, the 80 kilometre per hour speed limits of the trial becoming permanent. In terms of vehicle speeds, there was about what we expected. The highest change occurred on roads that had the highest before speed, as you'd expect, up to 10 kilometres per hour in change in average speed, and now a lot more people travelling at 80 kilometres per hour or less as the more safe speed on these roads. Compliance is also continuing to improve over time as they really bed in and people's behaviour change and they forget that the roads were ever a higher speed limit. Some people query, does the speed limit, changing the speed limit, make any difference to driver behaviour? This is one example on Tide Tooradin Road that had an average speed of about 92 beforehand, and by the end of the 2-year trial had an average speed of 81. The histogram also shows a shift to the left towards that 80 kilometre per hour speed limit and tightening around that 80 kilometres per hour speed limit, which essentially means there's a whole lot less kinetic energy on this road that carries about 10,000 vehicles per day every day. So an overall good improvement in safety. In terms of crash statistics, the trial period was during COVID, so we compared with control roads. So it was about a 68% reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes, which is about a net 20% relative to the control road, which is about what we'd expect. I guess our sort of headline information in this is that although there were 6 deaths in 2019 alone on these roads and 32 over the past 20 years, in the past 6 years there's been no deaths on any. Yeah, we think it's a really positive outcome. This project's shown that a sort of systemic batch approach to speed management is possible and achievable.
We might be losing you there, Matthew.
It can be hard with local government with us not being in control of the approvals and funding being limited, but having the overall road safety vision of towards zero really helped, building strong relationships internally and externally, including within our own organisation, having clear communication and evidence, as Michael was talking about, and relying on that and being clear, having pictures, for example, what is an appropriate 90 or 100k road versus what's an 80. Framing things as trials could be also helpful, as I alluded to. It can help get it across the line. Yeah, it needs some, in our case, it needed some persistence. So hopefully it becomes easier as these projects are being talked about today and others continue to move forward. So, yeah, there's various people that worked on it. Some of them are these, but there's a lot more information on our website about all those outcomes and report.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So again, any questions? We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A towards the end, but for now we'll jump across to the other side of Australia and hear from David about what's happening in Western Australia at the moment.
Thank you. Sorry, I've started in the middle of the presentation. First, I'd like to acknowledge this project's been largely funded by the RAC with cooperation from Main Roads WA, and we're using 2 different consulting companies, PJA and Abley, so I'm stealing a bit of their information to be able to make this presentation. The objectives of the trial is currently underway. RAC has some corporate objectives, which is a 50% reduction in killed and serious injuries by 2025 from a 2020 base. And appropriate speed limits are set by 2030 to increase survival rates when crashes occur. And in particular for this trial, that it would be a holistic and coordinated approach to setting speed limits and accelerate action to reduce killed and serious injury crashes and inspire other local governments to do the same thing. So RAC has provided $500,000 to fund the trial, so it doesn't really cost the Shire anything other than the time that the officers are investing in it. and they're also separately funding implementation and review. Initially, PJA were engaged to review the network and develop a strategy for the trial, and that ended up being setting speed limits on a harm minimisation approach. Issues that we had that persuaded council to participate in the trial, we have a fairly old rural road network with a lot of substandard bends and crests. And like some of the previous speakers have alluded to, lots of trees close to the edge of the road, and these are not going to be cleared. They're often the only vegetation because the surrounding land is farmland, all the trees have been cleared. They're also habitat, and even if we did want to clear them, it's so difficult to get a permit to clear native vegetation these days that it's in some cases not even worth trying. We have a lot of single lane rural roads within the Shire in areas that were previously very low volume, but volume has increased over time. We also have a large area of the Shire that's evident as the grey roads on the map on the right-hand side that don't have any speed limit, so the default of 110 applies. And that's on roads, as I mentioned earlier, that have got trees close to the edge and don't have particularly good geometry. We have a 400k gravel road network, and due to the state policy, that's not speed limited. We just use generic signs that encourage people to drive to conditions. We are getting a lot of run-off road crashes. We are getting a lot of roadkill, and that includes the critically endangered western ringtail possum. And whilst we have participated in upgrading some of our roads with regional road safety program funding, it's not possible or affordable to upgrade all of our rural roads to a higher standard that would address some of the safety concerns that currently exist. And there's, particularly the last 5 years since COVID, there's been a rapid increase in the number of community requests that we've been receiving for lower speed limits. Some in urban areas, but many of them on rural roads as well. All right, I'm having trouble getting to the next slide. Just some examples of typical roads within our Shire. On top left, you can see the vegetation close to the edge of the road. We also have table drains, sometimes with not recoverable batters. On the right-hand side, some narrow roads where cars coming in opposite directions are going to need to travel on the shoulder to pass safely. Another road that has got sufficient traffic volume to warrant having a centre line, but still trees close to the edge of the road. And then a typical gravel road, again with trees close to the edge. The planning process for the trial has worked by having a overall working group consisting of representatives of the RAC, our Shire, Main Roads WA and the WA Police Force. The trials involved a lot of public communication, marketing and engagement. Community were initially asked to nominate roads and areas where they would like reduced speed limits to be applied, and that was via a drop a pin on a map type process. And at that point, we engaged a consultant to review the network using traffic speed and volume data, land use, road hierarchy, previous crash statistics, and taking into account the community nominations. We had to do a bit of data collection to fill the gaps. We also reviewed Australian and international best practice so that we could develop a state-of-the-art rationale for speed limit setting. And through that process, we identified the candidate areas and roads for speed limit reductions. And just due to the volume of signage that would be required to be implemented as part of the trial, we had to reduce the trial area from the whole of the trial from the whole of the Shire to the western half of it. The rationale that's been developed for the trial, where speed limits are currently being set based on how roads are being used, which is typically the 80th percentile speed. The trial was about flipping that paradigm and setting speeds on a harm minimisation approach, so looking at the maximum speed that would be acceptable for that type of road, given the type of road safety features that it had. So that meant for rural roads, in this case, that 70, 80 or 90 would be appropriate depending on the safety features. So roads with that were wider, had sealed shoulders or edge lines or even audible edge lines might have a higher speed limit. As part of the trial, it was agreed to not include gravel roads because they're not currently speed limited at all. And the 4 state roads we have in the Shire are excluded as well. As I said, the trial was reduced to the western half due to the cost of the speed limit signage. You can see an example of part of the material that was released to the public, giving an example of what was a previously unsigned rural road that had a default 110k speed limit that's now been reduced to 70, and that's because it's relatively narrow and has trees close to the edge of the road. A map of the trial area, you can see the density of the yellow markings, that they're the town sites, of which there are about 6. There's a couple of smaller ones as well, but the rest is the rural network that's mainly connecting our main regional road, which is Bustle Highway, across to the coastal settlements. A community survey was conducted before the trial just to test what level of support there was and acknowledgement of the current road safety situation within the Shire. And there was a general positive response to issues such as acknowledging that speed plays a factor in crashes and that speed should preferably be reduced. But when people were asked about what particular reduction, what type of road reductions would occur on, the lowest net level of support we had was for rural roads. Interesting being, there was only a net 4% of people would support or strongly support reduced speeds on rural roads, whereas the net support was much higher on urban arterials and town centres and residential streets. The implementation process, once the assessment had been done, it was forwarded to Main Roads, who went through and some minor changes were made. The community was then consulted about the proposed speed limits. A further few changes were made based on that feedback. Council approved the whole package of works to proceed, and whereas Main Roads would normally do all of the signage changes themselves due to the sheer volume of signs required, this was contracted out for the first time, and in a win-win situation, an Aboriginal company was included as part of the as subcontractor to the main company that was doing the work. The changeover took several months to be implemented and was completed in July. So we've had, in preparing this presentation, about 4 months of the reduced speed limits. Just a table which is quite useful in indicating what sort of changes were made. These are segments of roads with speed limits, so there's more than the 550 roads within the chart. The vast majority of roads were residential streets that were reduced from 50 to 40. And then there's another high number that down in the red here, the 46 that were reduced from 110 to 60, which are all in rural residential subdivisions that were unsigned. They're an interesting case that I'm not speaking about much in today's presentation, but residents of those areas generally believe that they're living in a residential area where the default urban 50 limit applies, but they don't meet the requirement of a built-up area in the road traffic code, so by default the 110 limit actually applies. So they've now all got speed limits, although not everybody's happy about the 60 limit that's been introduced. Overall, in rural areas, there was only 20 to 25 roads that had reductions of 20 to 40 kilometres an hour, and they're the ones which have been the most controversial since the changes were made. We're only early in the process and not much monitoring has been undertaken as yet, but ABLI, which is New Zealand based, has been engaged by RAC to undertake a comprehensive evaluation after 12 months and then again after 3 years. Before trial data collection was undertaken, before the signage changes were implemented, and that included taking tube counts on a selection of roads of different types within the Shire, then within a control area, which is the Shire of Capel, which is about a 1 hour drive from the Shire, has a similar type of road network. The evaluation is going to be really comprehensive and include traffic speeds and volumes, including compliance with speed limits, crash statistics, fuel consumption, emissions, vehicle operating costs, whether there's been any mode change, the benefit cost ratio, and community acceptance. Some very early results which are based solely on a small sample of TomTom data, so I'm not using any graphs because it's potentially not that a reliable source at this stage. But we're talking about the rural roads where there was previously 110k speed limit, which is now 70. Prior to the trial, mean speeds were below 110, typically between 70 and 80, and now they've been reduced by 2 to 5 kilometres per hour and are close to the newly posted speed limits. And 85th percentile speeds have also reduced by a similar quantum, but they're still well above what the new speed limit is. There's been similar reductions on other rural roads where there was only a 10 kilometre an hour reduction, which was in all cases from 90 to 80 or 80 to 70, with 85th percentile speeds now closer to the speed limit. So even within the 4-month period, without any serious enforcement or much publicity, the results are encouraging. And we've got a lot of community feedback via our normal Shire platform for receiving feedback, but also a lot of unsolicited feedback via email. It's mostly negative. I'd say 90% of people are providing negative feedback and only 10% positive. Most of the objections relate to where there's been 20 to 30k reductions on rural roads. However, there are other concerns relating to the trial about, ironically, too many or too few speed limit signs, a lack of entry signage to know that you're entering an area where speed limits have been changed. Also, the frequency of speed limit changes along particular roads, although that's been happening within the state generally anyway, and also the consistency of speed zoning. And in most cases, that relates to an inconsistency with one particular state road, which is a tourist road. It's very windy with a lot of substandard bends, which has retained its old speed limit because state roads weren't included in the trial. So that's often cited as an example of inconsistency in the way that the trial has been implemented. The feedback we're getting highlights the need for ongoing community education, because I don't think people understand the concept of kinetic energy and the consequences of crashes at higher speeds. We did have some unsolicited police enforcement that was sent by another part of the police force that wasn't directly involved in the trial, and that created some community angst because people believed there should have been a lengthy settling in period where no fines were issued. And we also got some vandalism where signs were graffitied or removed and tossed in the bush. That's settled down, fortunately. However, on the negative side, we've received 2 petitions. The first one related to one particular road that links 2 towns. One's a coastal settlement and one's a rapidly growing inland area about 12 kilometres apart. And this is where the speed limit's been reduced from 100 to 70. The main crux of the petition, which I've included word for word there, is that there'd be an extra 56 minutes a week in travel time if you travel between the 2 towns every day. That calculation was incorrect. It's actually 21 minutes, or travel time surveys have been done based on actual travel times, and that's quite incorrect. Fortunately, the petition hasn't been submitted, even though it had 444 signatures last time we checked. There's a second petition which is a bit more concerning. It's a petition to end the trial that's not yet been submitted. It's got nearly 1,300 signatures calling for it to be ended immediately. I should have said that this was happening in the lead up to the October council elections, and we had one candidate running on the platform that he would end the trial immediately. And he had similar views to what's included in the petition, which is claiming that the basis of the trial misrepresented community support and misused accident statistics and misrepresented Road Safety Commission data, and that the RAC had a conflict of interest in sponsoring the trial, and that there's been confusing and inconsistent signage, and the trial's created frustration and unsafe driver behaviour, and the estimates of travel times are false. Anyway, sifting through I haven't included the more detailed information that was presented with the petition, but a lot of it's misleading and incorrect. But yet people are signing that, so we're going to have to deal with that when that's submitted to council. I find the community feedback that we've been receiving really disturbing, similar to what was presented about the national inquiry into lowering the rural default speed limit. What people are claiming, despite evidence to the contrary, that there's excessive travel time increases, and this is bad for business, particularly for companies doing deliveries, even though the vast majority of those deliveries are completed on state roads on which there's been no speed limit change. People are also claiming that the lower speed limits are increasing driver fatigue and risk because people are spending longer on the road. Also, people claiming that the lower speed limits cause a loss of concentration. People are looking at what's in the adjoining land rather than concentrating on the road. It's creating road rage, tailgating, unsafe overtaking movements, people who are staring at their speedos rather than at the road to check what speed they're doing, which presumably they must have been doing beforehand because there was still a speed limit before we changed. And what really concerned me was people claiming that speed limits would only be reduced where potentially fatal crashes were occurring. Now, I've worked in local government and in road safety for over 40 years, and a number of times I've been addressed by the community saying, are you going to wait until someone's killed before you do something? Well, now we're being told you should wait until someone's being killed before you do something. Other comments are along the lines of good drivers are being punished. It's not me. It's all the other people who are talking on their phones and fiddling around. We've had people claim that speed limit should actually be increased. Other people unbelievably claiming that in-vehicle safety systems will prevent crashes, despite an increasing proportion of vehicles in the fleet having that technology, and the road safety the crashes, killed and serious injury crashes are increasing across the country, despite that happening. People incorrectly claiming the lower speed limits delay emergency services where they're absolutely free to drive at whatever speed they need to. People claiming that it's causing confusion because the trial relates to one area only, and then when you drive to another part of the state, then you've got to drive at different speed limits for the same type of roads. Other people claiming there's more wear and tear on cars because you need to change gears more often. And other people who've gone through the crash stats and claimed that some are suicides and they don't count, and rationalised it down to, oh, there's only 5 fatalities in the Shire, so it's not justified. Whereas from our point of view, 5 fatalities is 5 too many. And other people mischievously claiming that the trial is to raise revenue through fines and to reduce insurance claims for the benefit of vehicle insurance companies. So where are we now? We've achieved some speed reductions without any enforcement. Police have said now coming into the Christmas season that they believe the settling in period is over, and they're more likely to be doing enforcement as a matter of their normal business model. There's going to be pressure on the Shire to abandon trial or increase the speed limit on some rural roads where think we've convinced council that we should hold off on that until at least the 12-month trial evaluation period is up and the results are back, which will be by mid-2026. And telling council that ideally speed limit increases would only be considered if roads were upgraded to a higher standard. And this is what some of the previous speakers touched on. So sealed shoulders and edge lines like the two pictures on the right there, the bottom one of which is the only brand new rural road that's been constructed in the Shire in the last 20 years. So it's got a wide centre line, sealed shoulders and edge lines. And we definitely need more community education to build support for the trial and combat the misinformation that's being circulated at present. So no preliminary results of any magnitude yet, but that's where we're at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Mindful of the time, we've gone a bit over there, but it really did highlight some of the challenges that you are having in your jurisdiction, and I guess the same challenges we had with trying to get our submission over the line. I guess that's contrasted with the successes that we've seen with Mornington Peninsula and Auckland there. So we've got challenges at both ends there. We've arguably run out of time for Q&A, but I see that actually our presenters have been doing a very good job of responding to a lot of the questions that have come through during the session. So that's been really good to see. And I think the upcoming Austroads project on supporting community change with speed management is going to be a really interesting one to hopefully get things over the line as well. So with that in mind, I think we'll wrap things up here, and I'd like to thank both the presenters here and the audience who've been tuning in as well for what's been an interesting first webinar. Look out for hopefully end of January, maybe early February, when we'll roll out the next one from here. And for everyone, I hope you have a nice Christmas break and holiday, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you very much.